I've spent the last few years thinking about how to deal with ghosts. And over the next 20 minutes, I want to share some of those thoughts with you. When we think of ghosts, quite often we're thinking about the spirits of the dead, unfinished business, haunting the sheet with the eye holes cut out of it. But in philosophy, we often run into the concept of the ghost and the machine. And this refers to the idea that there is a split between all the physical meat of your body and the thing that animates and drives it. This driver is the essence of what makes you yourself, what you might call your personality, or if you're feeling really daring, the soul. And for the purposes of this talk, the ghost is these bits and pieces of yourself that you leave behind after your physical body dies. This can look like the pile of books that you left next to your bed, a sheaf of old electricity bills, or the school reports from your childhood, but it also increasingly includes your digital accounts, your digital assets, and not just the things that you consciously create, but also the big data that's gathered about you by advertising networks and data brokers, the algorithmic assumptions and inferences that are made about you, the version edits of online documents, the search engine history, your browsing history, all of that stuff. And all of these things, in aggregate, get as close as we have ever come to recording the inner operations of our mind and the thought processes that we have as we learn and we play with ideas over time. And I think in many ways, the companies that collect all this information have a more intimate and objectively detailed record of the person who has died than even their spouse ever could. This is a type of record that many users are not even aware that they are leaving behind. I think that this data provides an insight into something even more private than what you might get from reading somebody's private correspondence to somebody else. It crosses right into the territory of intellectual privacy, which is a space so arcane that we don't even have proper laws to deal with it yet and govern how it should be treated, because it only very recently became possible to record it in any meaningful way. And in the absence of a framework for articulating the human impact of this data's existence, the technology industry as a whole has no established method for managing it appropriately. How often in our everyday work do we think about how to engage users with our product? And how often do we think about the fact that all of the users that we're trying to engage and convert and target at this moment are, at some point, going to die? In the age of tracking pixels and analytics and limitless storage, what happens to all of the information that we gather about these people? What happens to the information that's gathered about us? We're becoming a lot better at working out what to do with the consciously contributed data, like statuses, like selfies. Facebook, for example, has the ability to memorialize a deceased person's account. And more recently, they developed the legacy contact feature. This gets users thinking ahead of time what they want to happen with their data when they die. And they give a trusted person the authority to carry out those wishes. And Google's Inactive Account Manager does similar for the data that you put in Gmail and Drive and places like that. But we don't always give the same kinds of posthumous consideration to the big data that's generated by someone who's now deceased. The space that this person occupied in the map of the network of their friends, or the algorithmic predictions about their behavior, the search histories, all these trivial things that add up over time. We also don't seem to care as much about the data about a user that's added by other users. I think Dana Boyd said it best in a talk on network privacy. She said, "It's no longer about what you do that will go down on your permanent record. Everything that everyone else does that concerns you, implicates you, or might influence you will go down on your permanent record." All of this stuff makes your ghost a little bit more real. And thinking about how technologists can become better at working with ghosts has been one of my goals over the last few years. The way I view it, if we want to do ghost hunting, and I think that we should, this is how we do it. It's done in 3 stages: summoning ghosts, capturing ghosts, and liberating ghosts. Summoning is the part that we understand the best so far. But before I get into that, we need to take a quick detour for a history lesson. This is an example of ectoplasm. Back in the early 20th century, when people wanted to summon ghosts, they would hold a seance. Everyone would sit around a table, and a medium, who's somebody who could contact the spirits of the dead, would try to summon the spirit of the person that the group wanted to contact. And a regular feature of the early 20th century seance was ectoplasm. This word comes from the Greek roots ektos, meaning outside, and plasma, meaning something that is formed or molded. So ectoplasm was a substance that mediums expelled from their bodies when they were in a trance, and it was supposed to be a physical manifestation of the spirit in the physical world, something that a ghost could use to interact with objects and real life. And it was proven to be a hoax pretty quickly. In order to achieve this effect, the mediums would usually swallow long, thin strips of cloth, and then they would bring it back up again. And this picture, it's coming out of the medium's ear. Rest assured, there are a lot more disgusting pictures that I decided not to show you, but you can find them. But this century-old method of ghost summoning gives us something that I think is more relevant to how we summon modern ghosts, and this is what I call ecto-metadata. So the word ectoplasm, as I just said, it uses the Greek root ektos, meaning outside, and following the same Greek language roots, we've got meta, means beyond. So ecto-metadata, in this instance, is data that exists about us beyond what we express with our physical selves, but which is reproduced in a manner independent to anything that we ourselves are doing. To give a more concrete example, ecto-metadata is the idea that a person uses the internet over a number of years or decades. We take all of this data that is collected from and generated by and inferred about a person from all of this activity. We throw it on top of some machine learning algorithms, and we could then spin it up and use it as its own entity, external to that person. This word is new, but the concept's not. There are several startups and countless art projects that aim to use your data in just this way. They want to form online services to create a bot or an interactive digital memorial of you after you die. And there are startups like Eternomy. They want to provide a way for you to authorize them to collect your profiles to create a digital copy of yourself when you pass away. Previous virtual reality projects like Project Elysium aim to gather all these written messages from the dead so you can speak to them after they're gone. You put on an Oculus Rift and you can sort of see them and sit there. And there was a beautiful chatbot memorial that was created by a developer called Eugenia Kudya for her deceased friend. It collected all of the text messages that he had sent to his friends and family, and then it let those people text him after he was gone. But all of these projects are opt-in, highly manual processes. They usually require the active collaboration of the subject or their friends and family to harvest all of this information about them from a lot of different sources. And then they require endless fine-tuning of all the deep neural networks that are used to generate likely-looking responses. How long, though, until the data that's collected about us is used like this in an opt-out way? How will future APIs make it easier to consolidate it all? How many others are already or will start working towards the goal of making ecto-metadata an actual achievable reality? Let's say that we manage to achieve this goal. Once we have a ghost, what do we do with it? So most of the purposes we can use ecto-metadata for at present anyway deal with the needs of the bereaved, which makes sense. Almost without exception, all of the startups and the initiatives and the projects that I mentioned earlier, and also the vast majority of the science fiction on this subject, they're trying to preserve something of the person who has died, mostly to help the people who knew them through that grieving process. The most commonly envisaged method for interacting with a ghost at this point is through text-based conversations between a living participant and the data of the deceased. And Kudya's text bot for her friend, for example, this was intended as a digital memorial for a friend that she dearly missed. Project Elysium, the Oculus Rift people, they envisaged a quiet park bench where you could go and you could sit down and talk to your dead relatives as a way of letting them go and processing that for yourself. But while these applications are the first logical step, we are on the verge of taking the next ones. A large amount of this data is collected through or as a byproduct of advertising networks for commercial purposes, as we all know. We want to know what our users are interested in so that we can show them more of the relevant ads for products that they may not buy, but which people will pay us to show them. But ecto-metadata could be commercially valuable in other ways. For example, creating the appearance of artificial intelligence. Doing this, complete with its own personality, it's complex, it takes time. But if you borrow data from another person, which was ready-made with its own political leanings and food preferences and turns of phrase, for example, this could be a much faster way to get to this kind of goal. This data about an individual then becomes one of many skins, which is for all kinds of different intelligent bots, customer service chatbots, for example, the virtual assistant on your phone. And if you knew which data was associated with the person that someone cared about, you could charge them more to be helped day to day by their grandmother, or perhaps a favorite celebrity, because celebrities use the internet too. But outside of the realm of the commercial, what could we get out of our own ecto-metadata? Some folks already seek some kind of life after death. Like there are technologies like cryogenic freezing, for example, that aim to one day bring back the physical self with the hope that the mind will also return. Ecto-metadata feels like it could be another piece of this preservation puzzle. If people are already hoping to bring back their physical bodies, why not also their thoughts? And in many ways, I think that we're closer to finding the right algorithm to create a convincing facsimile of someone from their data than we are to understanding how to bring back a deceased body. In a similar vein, even forgetting about the need to die for this to happen to us, what could we do with our own ecto-metadata while we're still alive? If we had another copy of ourselves that we could bounce ideas off all the time, how would that work, this kind of interactive journaling? What kind of boring emails could our doppelgangers write for us? What kinds of incriminating emails could someone else make your doppelganger write as you? The scale of identity theft that's already perpetrated with stolen data is huge. The 2017 identity fraud study found that I think 1 in every 16 adults in the United States was a victim of this kind of crime in 2016, which is quite a few people. And as an industry, we tend to have a really poor grasp of where the fault lies for this. This is inherent in the actual phrase itself, identity theft. It's as if it's your fault somehow that your information has been stolen away, when really what enables this is data leaking due to a failure on the service's part to properly authenticate you. And if we're talking about the ability to identify and authenticate you, the scale of identity fraud that could be perpetrated with ecto-metadata is far more immense. This isn't just about mothers' maiden names. I'm talking about typing pattern fingerprints, things like this. These are measurable, storable, fakeable. They're metrics about you that are used for identification. And voice prints fall into the same category. It's very easy to fake them now, thanks to things like Adobe Voco and that kind of software. And how many ways could a stolen ghost with this level of imitation circumvent your company's safeguards? All of these potential use cases for ecto-metadata are missing the key ingredient to make them in any way ethical, which is a real and studied consideration about how we should plan for these possibilities when they arise and how we handle them gracefully when they do come. How do we care for this extremely intimate data about our users and our families and ourselves before it suddenly becomes a problem? How do we make sure that we don't allow someone to summon ghosts unwillingly? How do we make sure that we respect the wishes of the dead with regard to data that they didn't even know existed about them? As companies handling this information, much of the answer comes down to a working awareness that eventually all of your users are going to die. Human-computer interface researchers will call this sometimes thanatosensitivity, which is after Thanatos, the ancient Greek personification of death. And I think that as morbid as it is to design thorough, humane systems properly, we need to imagine death looking over our shoulders as we do it. Think about what the ecto-metadata of your users could end up looking like. Think about whether you are going to give them the option to understand the complete picture of their data and whether they have any reasonable pathways to tell you if they do or do not want that for themselves. Think about whether you yourself would want that. The easiest way to make sure that you're handling this correctly is to begin by collecting and inferring only the bare minimum that you need in order to make your product work. As usual in German, there is a lovely word to describe precisely this idea. You probably also know it as data minimization, data austerity, but I like this word better. And privacy activists and technologists have for a long time argued for the industry adopting this approach for its users. And in the last few years, we have started to do so. But it takes some effort to bring this into focus for your own work. And it starts with honestly answering the following two questions about any given piece of information about a user. Firstly, why are we collecting it? And secondly, how long do we actually need to keep it? Really, honestly. And hand in hand with the idea of data minimization comes the transparency that you have with your users about the actual real scope of the data that you have about them, including what you infer about them. With any choice to leave a service, or especially with death, which is the ultimate logout, there should be a right to be released at any level of the service. But at many turns, we still face a lack of clarity about what that complete picture of our data looks like. And as we don't really know the extent of the information that exists about us, we can't give any meaningful direction to our wishes for its use, especially after our deaths. And to a grieving next of kin, this is even harder to find out. For example, in creating the legacy contact feature, which I mentioned earlier, Facebook gives you some details about certain categories of data that can be downloaded by a trusted third party after you die, or they can be deleted on your behalf. And this includes consciously and willingly contributed kinds of information like statuses and photographs and events, that kind of thing. But its documentation is a lot less clear. It suddenly becomes extremely vague when talking about what happens with the rest of that information after death. Just like there are shadows in data which represent people who exist in a human social network but don't join Facebook, the shadow legacy of the deceased or the deleted user remains there too, in things like the people you may know feature. It still exists. And to the average user, it is not clear what happens posthumously to information that Facebook gets from advertisers, and the profiling done about a person's preferences based on the way that they interact with that service, and the picture of the extended network of people around them, even if they're no longer alive to participate in that network. So to handle the wishes of the deceased appropriately, we need to be able to find and provide meaningful pathways to capture those wishes. So features like Legacy Contact are a really good start. But to obtain meaningful consent about information use after death, we first need to be explicit about the scope of the information that we actually have. And outside of a company's work, there are things that we can do as individuals to regain control of our metadata, our ecto-metadata, and our afterlives. And one of the most enduring things that you can do, in my opinion, is to get involved in the lawmaking process, which I know a lot of you do. These are the decisions, the ones that touch on digital issues that, for better or worse, are going to govern our data and what happens to it for years and years to come. And I know a few of us here are lawyers. I'm not one, but everybody here is a technologist of one sort or another. And as interested parties, we can add our expertise to these particular processes. If laws are coming up for debate, especially if they're asking for public comment, write your thoughts down and send them, and encourage everybody that you know to speak up about it, challenge it, make noise. If a service or a company is using your information in a way that you don't think is right, let them know about it. So far, we can only do this bit for ourselves while we are alive. And I think it's important that we learn how to recognize and to hunt ghosts through all of the stages of summoning and capturing and liberating, because in the coming decades, we are going to grapple with the real possibility of ecto-metadata more and more. And in order to be ready for what's going to come, we need to think about the bigger picture of big data, really. We need to pave the way for our data to avoid any kind of unintentional or non-consensual afterlife. Because the ghosts in the machine become more detailed every day, and we must meet them on their terms, or they're going to haunt us in the days to come. Thanks.